Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited about today's talk. My name is Sean Godar, Vice President of Strategy and Analytics at Employers Health and Co-Director of Right Direction. I will be serving as the moderator for this webinar. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items to cover. Currently, all attendees are in a listen-only mode. Please use the Q&A function on the left-hand side of your console to submit any questions regarding the presentation. We will address them at the end. A copy of the presentation is available for download and can be found by clicking the paperclip at the bottom of your screen. Watch for the recording to arrive via email tomorrow or the following day. Upon exiting the webinar, you will receive a survey to provide valuable feedback. We appreciate all attendee feedback as it helps shape our future presentations. Before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to quickly talk about our initiative called Right Direction. Right Direction is a free turnkey initiative to help employers address mental health in the workplace by providing best practices, guidance, strategies, and resources on how to raise awareness, optimize mental health benefits, facilitate help-seeking behaviors, and improve mental health and improve workplace mental health for all. We have a number of resources and strategies on a variety of mental health topics, including working remotely, how to discuss mental health at work, how to build employee resource groups, self-care toolkits, and much, much more. So get started and visit our site at rightdirectionforme.com. Over the last few years, we've experienced many changes to how we work, how we interact, and how we live. And we've gone through a global pandemic, followed by periods of political and social divisions that have contributed to feelings of uncertainty about our health, our jobs, and our social and family lives. These feelings have also led to a significant increase in stress and higher rates of depression and anxiety throughout the U.S., which underscores the urgent need for employers to help support their people managers through training and provide accessible and affordable quality mental health care to their employees. Today, we would like to welcome our guest speakers, Dr. Ashley Smith and Dr. April Seifert, to talk about how employers can help support employees thrive during these times of uncertainty. Dr. Smith is a licensed clinical psychologist and co-founder of Peak Mind, the Center for Psychological Strength. Since earning her PhD from the University of Nebraska in 2007, she has become a sought-after specialist in the treatment of anxiety disorders. Dr. Seifert is a psychologist, data scientist, and serial entrepreneur. She holds a PhD in social cognitive psychology from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and has spent over a decade studying the ways our minds store information, form habitual and subconscious thought processes, and how all of it impacts our behaviors and our life experiences. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks, Sean. So I want to thank all of you guys for joining us today as well. We know that you are busy. It is my understanding that this is World Cup. And so we're thrilled that you would take the time to either join us live or catch this on the replay to talk about this important topic. So at Peak Mind, we are dedicated to making the tools and information from the fields of psychology and life design readily available. We want to help you and your teams build psychological strength and know how to handle times of change and uncertainty with resilience and with strength. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, I always have to take a big sigh when we put this image on the screen. It does a good job of highlighting just a little bit of the uncertainty that we've all experienced over the last few years and continue to experience today. So I want you to just take a minute, look at these images, and think about which one of them you relate to the most. Which one of them has had the biggest impact on you personally? Take just a second. And when you put that image in the context with the rest of all of these, images that portray the uncertainty that we've all been through, you really can see that the whole of it is more than the sum of the parts. And if you think about going back to talk to a version of you 3 years ago, do you think that that version of you would actually believe the story that you'd be telling that person about what the world looks like today. And when we look at all of these images, the thing that's missing from this screen is anything that you individually might have experienced in your life. So when you put that together as a whole, we've all gone through a lot of uncertainty, a lot of adversity, a lot of challenge recently, and a lot of it, we didn't see it coming. It was something that we couldn't have foreseen, and yet here it is in front of us, another thing that we need to deal with and another challenge that we need to get through. So before we move on, I want you all to think, at some point in the last 2 to 3 years, has there been a moment where either through a personal challenge that you've experienced or something on this screen, you've felt yourself struggle, like truly, truly struggle? I want you to think about that for just a second. And the thing is, most of us can probably say yes, right? And the data back that up. When we look back at January in 2019, Kaiser Family Foundation does a number of annual surveys of mental health across the United States. And in January 2019, they found that about 11% of adults reported symptoms of anxiety disorder and/or depression. 11%. They repeated that study in January of 2021. That number was 41%. 41. That is an incredible increase over the last couple of years. And the thing is, if many of you are like me, like Ashley, like so many of us, you start to struggle with the things that you're facing, that adversity, that uncertainty, that volatility, you struggle with it. And instead of thinking about how many other people are likely struggling right along with you, we tend to point our finger at ourselves. We tend to think, I am not strong enough. I somehow lack resilience. I somehow am not thriving or dealing with this well, when everyone else around me has somehow figured out a way to get through it unscathed. So before we go any further, the thing I want you to take away from this study is that you absolutely, and your teams absolutely, are not alone. If there's been times, maybe there are moments, maybe there are extended periods of time where you have struggled in the last few years. And the thing about it is that the situation that we've all been experiencing in the last few years, how many times have we heard, this is a once in a lifetime occurrence. This is unprecedented. These times are not normal. And not only that, not only have they not been normal, they've been unstable and ever changing. And how many people, you think about the last few years, how many of you have thought to yourself, okay, I finally got a handle on this pandemic thing, or okay, I finally think I've adapted to maybe the political or the social unrest that we have. I think I've got a handle on this. I think I'm doing well, only to have things change again, maybe even the next day. The thing is, human beings have evolved to have an incredibly powerful mind that is very good at capturing nuance. And because of that, the situation that we've all been in is very difficult for us. It's almost impossible not to have some kind of reaction to the way that life has gone for the last year and a half. And our reactions might be a little bit different depending upon our own personal circumstances, but this quote from Viktor Frankl is a great one. An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. Because you are a human being with a mind. That's the only requirement to be a human being with a mind. You absolutely will react in a difficult way in uncertain situations like the one that we've been in.
So we've established, it's been some unprecedented years, but the reality is uncertainty has always been a part of life. It will always be a part of life. The difference for the last few years is that we experienced a lot of shared uncertainty. And so it just shined a spotlight on things where we could say, wait a minute, it's not just me having a hard time with this, it's everybody. But with that, it's important to keep in mind that uncertainty is an inherent part of life. And because of the way our minds are designed, it is inherently challenging for us. We're going to get more into that. Before we do, let's talk about what it actually means to thrive. So thriving is flourishing. It's being the best possible version of you, physically, mentally, socially, emotionally, spiritually, financially, all of the leads, right? So thriving is being this vibrant, healthy version of yourself. And we need the right conditions to thrive. I love telling people about my aloe plant. I'll keep it short. But I have this aloe plant that I have had for a number of years, 6, 7 years. When I first got it, I lived in a high-rise apartment in downtown Kansas City without a lot of windows, and the ones that were there weren't open. So this poor little plant did not get a lot of light, and I did not remember to water it very often. It didn't die, but it was kind of this little shriveled, light green thing. Now I live in a house where it's got this giant window with the right kind of facing sun. I remember to water it. And this thing is huge. It's tripled in size. It's a vibrant green because it has the right conditions to thrive. We are like that aloe plant. When humans are in the right conditions, when we have social connections, we have predictability, we have safety and security, we have all of the things that we need, it's easy for us to thrive. We don't always have those conditions, especially when we're in times of uncertainty, or if that uncertainty comes along with change and transition, we may be in conditions that we can't necessarily control or dictate. There's still some things that we can do to facilitate our thriving. And a related concept to that, and one that we've heard a lot about over the last couple of years, is resiliency. And being resilient just means being able to bounce back after a hard time or bounce back from adversity. So at Peak Mind, our goal is to really focus on thriving in resiliency in the face of uncertainty, change, and adversity. Our goal is to be able to navigate those challenging situations in such a way that you come out the other side having grown, that you are stronger, healthier in so many ways. It does not mean being unaffected. It does not mean being unaffected by uncertainty. We're going to get into the principles of why. So with that, we're going to dive deep into 3 psychological principles that will help you understand why our minds hate uncertainty so much. This is not an exhaustive list. There are other principles and factors at play, but these are 3 key ones that will help you understand your own reactions. And then it becomes knowledge that you can take back to your teams to either teach them directly or use it to inform the ways that you interact with them and support them.
All right, so let's start with principle number 1. Principle number 1 is that our minds run on shortcuts. And I love this principle because, number 1, it goes squarely at the field of psychology that I've been in, the cognitive side of the field, but it really underscores the basics of how our mind works. Our mind has one big goal. It wants to keep us alive while expending the least amount of energy possible. So there's 2 parts of that, right? Our mind wants to keep us alive. It wants to get us through the day alive. And so it has a bunch of different capabilities and a bunch of different rules of thumb that it uses in order to make sure that we make it through the day alive. Notice we did not say our mind's goal is to get us through the day thriving and feeling great. No, our mind's goal is just for us to get to the end of the day. We're still breathing, heart's still beating, success. But there's another component to it. And that initial piece, that gets quite a bit of press, but it's the second piece that we miss quite often, and I think is incredibly important for us to understand. And that is that it wants to expend the least amount of energy possible. Now let's think about why that might be. Our mind has a giant job. Not only is it responsible for things like making our heart beat and keeping us breathing and all of those really basic biological functions, but we make thousands and thousands and thousands of decisions every single day. We take in millions and millions of pieces of information every single day. That is a lot for our mind to handle. And it has one way of being able to handle that. It can't spend its energy trying to sift through all of those bits of information or think really deliberately about every one of those decisions. We would never make it through the day. So instead, what it does in order to conserve energy is it backburners things. It tries to come up with shortcuts or patterns that it can rely on. Because when it's got a reliable set of patterns, it can save some of that energy that it would use to make those decisions, to take in that information, and it can put it in reserve just in case something pops out from behind a bush and tries to kill us, right? So I want to get you through the day. I want to do it while expending the least amount of energy possible. And you guys have all interacted with some of these rules of thumb or these heuristics or shortcuts or backburners. You can use all those words interchangeably for the purpose of what we're talking about today. So I'm going to give you an example. Have you ever moved to a new house, new apartment, or changed jobs in the same city? The first couple of weeks, everything goes fine, right? You get up, you drive to work like normal, things are fine. You go to your new job or you go to your new apartment or your new house. But a couple of weeks in, your mind starts to wander. Maybe you're singing to your favorite song on the radio or you're distracted in some way and you realize you are taking the off-ramp that goes to your old job or your old house. What happened there? It's a pattern, it's a shortcut, it's a heuristic that your mind encoded so that it didn't have to think so hard about navigating your way to the place that you're trying to get. And when you got distracted and when you weren't focused, your mind did what it does best. It relied on a shortcut and it sent you down the wrong off-ramp. These shortcuts are powerful enough that they can get you to drive a motor vehicle without even realizing it. Let me give you one more example. Most mornings or most days, depending on your schedule, we take a shower. Do you use shampoo or conditioner first? Think about which one you use first. What if you did it in reverse? What if tomorrow you got up and instead of following that predictable pattern that you have done for weeks, months, years of your life, you decided, nope, conditioner, then shampoo today? How would you feel? Wet cat. You'd feel about as good as this cat right here. I mean, think about that. It's something so insignificant, right? It's just which shampoo or conditioner did you use first? But that little insignificant deviation is enough to register. You just wouldn't feel right. And if that little insignificant change is enough to register, imagine, think back to that slide that I showed you a few moments ago with all of those images of everything that we've all been collectively dealing with over the past few years, plus your own personal adversity. Imagine the toll that that can take. The thing is, our mind wants to get us through the day alive while expending the least amount of energy possible. And when we, quote unquote, break the rules, when we go against a shortcut that our mind has learned that it can rely on, it doesn't like it. It doesn't ever like it. And it has one very clear signal that it sends us when we've broken the rules and we've gone against a shortcut. We've essentially made it think too hard or work too hard. That symptom that it sends us is anxiety. We tend to feel anxious. We feel off. We feel maybe fearful, right? We tend to not feel like ourselves simply because we've just broken one of the rules that our mind thought it could rely on. So let's talk a little bit about what that has to do with our current situation.
So one of the shortcuts is pattern recognition, right? Our minds are fantastic at recognizing patterns. That's why That's why we have a propensity to see human faces all over the place, right? Like on the moon, the tile in my bathroom, I can easily find faces in the swirls of the marble. And we do this, we recognize patterns. And one of the most basic patterns that our mind does is familiar or not familiar. That's it, familiar or not familiar. And this is really important because our mind takes it as if it is familiar, it can adopt a been there, done that attitude. With familiarity comes predictability. Oh, I know this, right? Same song, different verse, or this is a rerun of every day before today. When it is familiar, it is predictable, and we assume safety. So when our pattern recognition machinery gets going, familiar, cool, I can relax, I can feel calm, I can feel certain. But as soon as something violates that not familiar, then we get that wet cat, right? I call it the inside ick. Anytime we step out of this familiarity zone, and I like familiarity over comfort because it helps us really understand we are going to have this very predictable, icky, anxious, stressed response anytime our mind recognizes not familiar. That's been a lot lately. And there's this term that we got from the US military that we really like. It's VUCA. And it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, right? So when situations are changing, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of complexity, a lot of ambiguity. We do not have predictability. We do not have familiarity. Our minds hate it. They hate these VUCA experiences. So go back to this. Think about all of the VUCA that's been going on globally. How about personally? And how about business-wise? Are we in person? Are we remote? Is it a hybrid? Is leadership changing? Are teams being reorganized? Are expectations shifting? How much VUCA do we have? And is it any wonder that you or your teams might be feeling a little wet cat? It does not mean that you are deficient. It does not mean that your teams are not resilient or that they're coping badly. All it means is that we are humans with human minds, and our minds are doing what they were designed to do in VUCA, unfamiliar situations.
All right, so with that, let's jump into principle number 2. And I alluded to this a bit earlier. Our minds want to keep us alive, right? They want to keep us alive while expending the least amount of energy possible. Let's go back to that first part of this sentence. Again, they want to keep us alive, but they don't want to help us thrive. That's not the goal. And because our minds want to keep us alive, one way they do that is they're more likely to seek out and find threatening or negative information. So we're more likely to seek out, find, believe negative information. So this threat seeking or this negativity bias that our mind has, it ties back to this notion that Ashley talked about familiar things, predictable things. We assume things that are familiar and predictable, we assume them to be safe. Now this is interesting, right? The key word is assumed there. I mean, think about this, like, how worried are you right now about the giant meteor that is heading toward the Earth? Or how worried are you that you might not wake up tomorrow? We don't really have any guarantee that neither of those things are happening or could happen. But we assume, unless there's a bunch of evidence to show the contrary, that we have certainty. We assume that. We assume there is no meteor. We assume we are going to wake up the next day. But the thing is, in the grand scheme of things, the simple fact is that actual certainty, and Ashley alluded to this as well, actual certainty is an illusion. But the additional point there is that when we're confronted with that fact, when we start to see evidence of it in the form of some of those photos that we showed on those previous slides, it kind of shakes up our entire worldview. In the absence of familiarity or predictability or certainty, or that implied safety or assumed safety, we get anxious. Our mind says, I thought I could rely on the predictability of things, and now this evidence is showing me the contrary, and I don't like it. And as a way of coping and as a way of showing you that I don't like it, I'm going to send you anxiety. I'm going to send you stress. So our minds, as a baseline, are looking for everything that could go wrong. They're planning and they're preparing for the worst. And the negativity bias is just another one of those heuristics or shortcuts that our mind has developed to try to keep us safe. And things like this don't help, right? Sometimes we watch the news, and do you remember during COVID, we would see these really big, scary, like red maps? I probably don't have to go much further, right? Like under normal non-COVID circumstances, we have this negativity bias. Under normal circumstances where there isn't massive shakeup in corporate or professional settings, we have this negativity bias. But when we're constantly being fed information or evidence of or news of this uncertainty, our mind kind of goes on red alert. These scary maps, the civil unrest around the world. There have been over 600 mass shootings in the US so far this calendar year. We have warnings of economic downturn. I probably don't have to go on. It's a lot. So when you think about it and you move that into a professional or a corporate setting, organizations are undergoing change. If you think about what news is being communicated to your teams, either intentionally or unintentionally, just in the form of speculation or gossip, think about how many metaphorical red maps are being put in front of your teams on a daily basis. And I want to end this by talking a little bit, or kind of wrap up this principle by talking a little bit about this parable. And you might have heard it. It is a parable of two wolves. And this is a really great way of thinking about sort of the balance that these red maps or these metaphorical red maps can put on our mind. So here's this parable. There was a grandfather that said to his grandson, there's a battle between two wolves inside of us all. One wolf is evil. It's anger. It's envy, jealousy, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, anxiety, inferiority, ego, lies. And the other one is good. It's joy, it's peace, it's love, it's hope and serenity, kindness, benevolence, empathy, compassion, faith. We all have these two wolves inside of us. And the grandson thought about it for a second, and he asked his grandfather, well, which wolf is going to win? And the grandfather said, the one you feed. And that really wraps up this principle so well. Our mind by nature gravitates toward that bad wolf. As a general rule, our mind gravitates toward negativity. What we need to do consciously is think about the wolf that we're feeding in all of our actions. And we're going to get to that a little bit more in just a moment. Okay, principle number 3. This is one that I love to talk about because this is one that we don't talk about enough outwardly with groups of folks. This is another one of those that gets kind of kept behind the closed door of a therapy room or inside the walls of academia. But that is that our mind likes what we call clean emotions. So I want to illustrate this for just 1 second. Look at this paint can and tell me what color it is. Is it blue? Would you call this green? How about orange? Probably not, right? Like you're probably thinking I'm maybe colorblind as I'm looking at this slide. But no, it is not any of those colors. Most of you would probably say, I don't know, like gray or sludgy, sort of grayish maybe. What if I said that this paint can is actually a mixture of blue, red, green, yellow, and orange? all mixed together into that sludge. The thing is, our mind, I mentioned it a moment ago, likes clean emotions. Clean emotions are easy to label, they're easy to identify the cause of, and they come one at a time. They come one at a time. So like this paint can, sometimes we experience pure sadness. Sometimes we just get blue paint. That's it. Pure sadness is a lot easier for our mind to manage than if you take blue paint and red paint, that red paint signifying anger, and you mix them together. Our mind doesn't know how to sift that on its own. What if you throw some green paint in with that sadness and anger? You throw a dose of envy in there. Throw some yellow in there. Throw some guilt in there too. And hey, just for fun, let's throw some orange. Let's throw some excitement or some happiness in there. Let's make it really confusing and convoluted. And then let's stir it up. Our mind has a really hard time with these unclean emotions, these emotions that are a lot more complex than what it wants to handle. And we're gonna recap a lot of these here in the back portion of this conversation. But before we get there, I just want to recap really quickly. The 3 things that we talked about, if you want to screenshot this just so that you have a couple of notes going forward, our minds run on shortcuts. They want to keep us alive, not thrive. And they like clean emotions. So take just a second, screenshot that if it's something that you want to make sure that you have with you.
So we gave you these principles because we big believers that the more you know about your brain, the more you understand about how your mind works, the easier it is to navigate challenging situations, the easier it is to make your mind work for you rather than against you. So we're going to use these principles to build on. We're going to do some work. Now, while we've got you the remainder of today, we're going to ask you to focus on doing this work yourself, with the idea that if you really understand it, then you can either teach it to your team, you can share these strategies we're going to go through with your employees, with your leaders. You'll be able to foster conversations really based on how to thrive through uncertainty with a solid understanding rooted in science. And we're hoping too that it'll help you with this foundation, help you be better able to select additional resources or tools to really help your teams thrive. So the first thing I want you to do is think of a personal situation that feels uncertain. Now, and when I say personal, you can use one that has to do with work or your professional life, but I want you to think of one that is unique to you. So your own VUCA situation. Get that in mind, a time when you're feeling something that's making you feel uncertain. And I want you to think about all of the factors of that situation that are impacting you. I want you to think about all of the different variables that you are trying to control or that are having an impact on you. And what we're going to do is I want you to either grab a sheet of paper, grab your phone and use the notes function, or just do this in your mind. But I want you to sort these things, all of these factors, all of these variables. Are they inside your circle of control, or are they outside of your circle of control? And if they're inside, put them on the inside. If they're outside, put them on the outside. And as you're thinking through that, I'm going to give you an example just so we can kind of use this. I was sharing before everybody joined us that I'm going to be doing some extensive traveling while working remotely. And this is definitely out of my familiarity zone, right? So there's that uncertainty, there's that VUCA. I think I have all of the tech pieces worked out, but until I actually do it, I don't know for sure. So when I think about the things that are going on in here, I have certainly my travel plans, where I'm staying, the technology that I'm using, the people that I'm traveling with, the nature of my job, my own personal experiences with dealing with technology issues, my confidence there. There are things that might also impact this if we lose power because of weather, things like that. So those are all of the variables that I might be sorting inside and outside of my circle of control. And as you're doing this, I want to talk just a minute about control. Because control is something that humans like, right? We really feel happier when we have a sense of control. So control is a good thing, except that a lot of people also struggle with it, right? We even have the terms control issues, right? And so when we think about what is control, control is the ability and the authority to determine how things will be. Let me say that again. It's the ability and the authority to determine how things will be. So when it comes to the things that are inside your circle of control, these are the things that you have the choice over and you have the power over to direct or dictate. Now, it's different than influence, right? Now, I would argue that you actually cannot control my emotions. You can influence them. If you ran up and kicked me in the shin, there's a decent chance that I might have a reaction of anger, shock, or hurt. But if I'm feeling super zen that day, maybe I just have compassion or equanimity and I'm not fazed by it. So you can influence certain things, but not necessarily control them, because it is not 100% up to you to dictate or determine how it will be. Now, I've been in practice as a psychologist for 15 years now, full time. And the number one struggle that I see boils down to an illusion of control. We get twisted up about what we can and can't control. And what I see time and time again is this misperception. People spending time and energy and effort to control the things that are outside of their circle of control, right? We're trying to control other people's emotions or thoughts or beliefs or behaviors or the future, things like that. So we try to control things that we don't actually have control over. That is a waste of time, effort, and energy that also brings up even more inside ick. And I see people readily give up control of the things that are actually inside your circle. So we have to get that straight. That is one of the most important things that I think we can do in terms of building thriving and resilience, is get really clear on what is and isn't inside our circle of control. So let's go through some things that are outside our circle of control. These are the things that I cannot choose. I cannot necessarily fully determine or dictate. These are the things, if it has to do with someone else, I'm sorry to tell you, it is not inside your circle of control. Influence, perhaps, not control. I am not responsible or able to determine how April feels about things, or what her beliefs are, or her thoughts, including her thoughts about me. So even the choices that she makes, those are all up to other people. It's important for you to know when it comes to your employees, you can't control their internal reactions, their decisions, their choices. Now we can influence. Again, these are our policies. If you violate policies, you lose your job. We hope that that will influence their choices, but they are in control of it, not us. We cannot control the future. We cannot control outcomes, especially if it's a very complex situation with lots of factors or lots of people involved. I don't have complete control over outcomes. The future, natural disasters, chance events like global pandemics, we don't have control over, but it affects us. Even genes. Now, we're learning that there are certain behaviors and environmental factors that can influence the expression of genes, turn them on and off. And maybe at some point we'll have gene therapies, you can go in and control those, but right now we can't. Now, things on the inside of our circle of control. This is where I see people give up a lot of the control that they do have. We can control our values. I get to choose what's important to me, what my guiding principles are. We can control our beliefs. Now this gets really interesting, and I'll keep it super short because it's not for today. But understanding that our beliefs are programmed, more or less, without our consent or our intention as we grow up. And so a lot of the formation of our beliefs happens outside of our control, or we give up that control. But we can take that back. So we can intentionally change our beliefs. So that puts it inside our circle of control. Now, thoughts and feelings are interesting. I would argue that we don't have direct control over those. If I held a gun to your head and I said, be calm, could you do it? No. And so we can't necessarily control the feelings that we have or the thoughts that go through our mind. What we can control is our reaction to them. What do I do when these feelings show up? Do I add more sludge, more ick to the paint can? Do I respond with courage, with curiosity? I can control my attitude and my mindset, my attention, the choices that I make in my actions. So I want you to go back to your situation, your VUCA situation, all of those factors, all of those things that you're trying to control. Do you need to resort them? Or are there some pieces that you've been trying to control that really aren't yours, so you need to work on letting go of them? Are there things you haven't been controlling that you need to claim control over, like your attitude, your courage? Draw another circle or add some notes. And as you go, I want to give you a few questions just to kind of ponder on. I missed effort. Effort is up to you. But I want you to think about a couple of questions. And you can come back to these afterwards if you want to do some more writing or intentional reflection on them. But I want you to think about, why do some things feel like they should be controllable when they aren't? Where does that come from? Why is this such a universal experience that we try to control things that we can't? Why do we feel pressure to control those things? Why don't we focus on controlling the things we actually can? Is it that I didn't know that I had a choice here? Is it that it's too much work or it's too scary? And just a couple other quick questions to tuck away to come back to, because I want to make sure we have time for everything. I want you to think about, how have you been trying to control things that are not yours to control? For example, you send an email, you're nervous about it. Do you then find yourself checking your email 19 times every 10 minutes? That checking isn't actually changing anything. It's not influencing the outcome, the response you're going to get, but we do it to feel a sense of control. Are you avoiding things? I don't want to face that. I don't want to feel uncomfortable, so I'm not having that conversation with my coworker that I need to have. What are you doing to control or not control those things?
Amazing. I want you to keep in mind what Ashley just took you through, because it really relates to this next technique that is called starving the bad wolf and feeding the good one. Now, there's an interesting, misconception about how our minds work. Ashley alluded to part of it, and that is, people believe that they can somehow control their thoughts or control their emotions. How many of you ever sat down to try to meditate and found it a really frustrating experience because about 15 seconds in, found yourself sort of like planning out your day or remembering something that happened yesterday, and you thought, oh, nope, I'm not supposed to do that. And then you make it another maybe 10 seconds, and then here it comes and happens again. That frustration comes out of the fact that we don't have a lot of control over our thoughts, the urges that come from them. That just isn't something that's inside of our circle of control. Those are things that just kind of happen in our mind. But what we do have control over, and Ashley talked about, are reactions to those thoughts, where we put our attention, the way that we decide to behave as a result of them. So that action, that middle piece, the piece that's inside of our control, that will actually help dictate what the result and what the outcome will be for us. So when we're feeling that that feeling of anxiety or fear or uncertainty or the inside ick or the wet cat, whichever one you like, when we're feeling that, do we focus on it? Do we quote unquote feed that bad wolf? Do we behave in that sort of repetitive way that Ashley just gave as the great example with just an email, right? We sort of obsessively check our email because we think somehow that that is going to give us this sense of control back. What that action is doing is it's feeding the bad wolf. We can just as easily use that action to create more of the thoughts and the urges that sway in the direction of the good wolf. Another way of thinking this, or another way of conceptualizing this, is that you can't think your way out of a mindset problem. It's not the thinking that's the problem. Our mind learns, and this is the basics of neuroplasticity. Our mind learns through doing and seeing real outcomes, real tangible outcomes. We prove to our mind that we are not going to die if we don't obsessively check our email after we sent the one that made us anxious by not doing it and showing that it was okay. We essentially morph the edges of that familiarity zone and learn to be familiar with things that were once unfamiliar. And that's what we call starving the bad wolf and feeding the good one. So I want you to think back to that situation that Ashley had you think about, you know, the one that brought up a lot of anxiety. Can you think about ways in that situation that you might have been inadvertently feeding the bad wolf? Maybe giving in to urges, or maybe you reacted impulsively. You found yourself, you know, maybe obsessively checking or focusing or spiraling down in a set of negative thoughts. Think about your reactions, that middle part. What falls under the side of feeding the bad wolf? And now the flip side, the good wolf. What might you have done that could have fed the good wolf? How could you have used what is inside your circle of control to tip the scales in the direction of the good wolf? Because remember, negativity bias, our mind will go toward the bad wolf all on its own. So sometimes when we talk about this type of thing, people say, yeah, but it feels fake for me to focus on the good wolf. That feels biased. I mean, this potentially negative thing could happen. That feels biased. And what we like to say is, no, your mind is biased at baseline. It has a negativity bias at baseline. What you're doing by feeding the good wolf is you are tipping the scales back into balance. You're focusing on the things that your mind has sifted out because it doesn't naturally gravitate toward them. So think about how you might intentionally feed the good wolf in that situation. I want to give a quick example that it's easy to come up around. I mean, we just went through in the US, we just went through an election cycle. This was definitely the case during the pandemic. We see it a lot with a lot that's going on internationally and domestically in the news. When we watch the news, which is a very multimedia, multi-sensory experience, it's a way of consuming the news. We're giving more attention, we're giving more of our sensory experience to that negativity versus if we just read the news. What if you just read it online or in a physical paper or on your phone? It's not as much of an in-depth sensory experience. That experience doesn't draw you in the same way that watching a video and hearing people's reactions and seeing so much detail, how much of it would. And let's talk about quantity. How many times have you found yourself doom scrolling? You've gone much past the point of being an informed adult, and now you're doom scrolling, you're spiraling. How about on social media? What you're interacting with? Social media is run by a set of machine learning algorithms. They learn what you, quote, like, based on what you engage with, much like our mind does, and they send you more of it. So our attention, our behavior, that's something that we can control, and it is something that influences the way that our mind works. Much like those social media algorithms, our mind will send you more of what you engage with. And if what you're engaging with is the bad wolf, it's going to send you more of the bad wolf. Versus if we intentionally tip the scales back toward the good wolf, we're going to get a much more balanced representation, a much more palatable representation of reality.
So kind of bridging the gap between circle of control and feeding the good wolf and moving into this next piece of motion shifting, dealing with complex, unclean or dirty emotions. I want to bring up something that applies more on a team level, is when I think about how to help support employees and how do we feed the good wolf on an organization level. I want to highlight a couple things. One, telling people just don't worry about it. It'll all be okay. Isn't really that helpful. It's either going to feed the bad wolf of like, okay, what if, okay, I got a little bit of reassurance, so here we go. Or what it really will do on an organization level, if we know we're in uncertainty and you try to pretend as though we're not, people feel invalidated and it breaks trust. So we want to acknowledge, yeah, this is hard. Yes, this is a time of uncertainty, or this is something that we're all struggling with. And here are the reasons why it's going to work out. Here are the pieces that we are leaning on. Here are our values as a team or as an organization. Here are is it honesty? Is it open communication? Is it we have your best interests at heart? So we have to acknowledge the reality of the situation. When we deny it or minimize it or just be positive, bad things happen. And that brings us to emotion sifting, because this really acknowledging what's coming up is a core piece of emotional intelligence. As April mentioned, one of the principles, our minds like clean emotions. Clean emotions, they're nice and neat, they're easy to label, they make sense. They happen one at a time. What happens though, in uncertainty or adversity, we have very complex emotions, lots of it coming all up at once, that emotional sludge, and then we react to it. Keeping in mind, our reaction to our feelings is inside our circle of control. This is changeable for me. But I mentioned I'm going to be doing some traveling. I feel uncertain. I feel anxious about it. Because I understand, oh, that's just my mind doing what it does, I can respond with compassion. Instead of, what's wrong with you, you coward? Add some shame. You shouldn't be feeling this way. Add some disgust or some sadness or some anxiety. So we don't want to be adding more ick, more sludge. Instead, we want to start to sift it apart, being able to really look at and understand our emotional situation, our emotional experience. April has a beautiful example to highlight this tool.
You know, what Ashley has on the screen right here is something called the Wheel of Emotions. You can Google this. You can find them all over the place. I would just urge you to find one that doesn't begin in the center. And I'm going to try not to set Ashley off on a soapbox because we're
I'll stay up.
But it needs to not be in the center as good and bad. Good and bad are not emotions. We could talk about that for an hour. But find yourself a wheel of emotions, and that's going to be the tool that you're going to use for this exercise. And I want to give just one personal example of a time that I have used this exercise to help understand my own emotional sludge. When I was about 11 years old, my dad passed away from colon cancer. He went through cancer treatment for 5 years. It was a really grueling time for my family. He ultimately lost his battle with cancer when I was 11 years old. And I experienced a myriad of emotions after that. Dare I say, I experienced that emotional sludge. Now, there's some predictable emotions there. Sadness. I bet there was some blue paint in that can, right? And that sadness, if it was clean, it would be a lot easier to handle. But that sadness had some red paint mixed in with it, some anger around knowing that he had symptoms of cancer that he ignored, and the questions and uncertainty around what would have happened had he intervened earlier. There's green paint in there. There's envy or jealousy, Father's Day would come around and there'd be other kids who got to celebrate with their dad and I didn't. There was joy. There was orange paint in there. At his funeral, we talked about, and in the years since, we've talked about little quirks that my dad had about like mixing cereals together in the morning and some of these other quirky behaviors and personality traits that he had. There's joy there. But when you put them all together in the paint can, you're just left with this confusing feeling. So instead, what we ask you to do is rely on this wheel of emotions, especially in the beginning when you're practicing this. Pick emotions randomly on the wheel and ask yourself this question. What might cause a person in my situation, not you, someone else, what might cause a person to feel excitement in this situation? What about this situation could cause a person to feel excitement? Just get curious, come up with an answer. Does that answer apply to you at all? Does it feel at all familiar? How about jealousy? What might make a person feel jealous? What would be a very natural thing? Like a person would naturally feel jealous given these aspects of this circumstance. And do that for more and more emotions on the wheel. Notice you're not getting rid of any of them. I didn't get rid of the sadness. I didn't get rid of the anger. I'm not getting rid of the joy. I'm also not adding to it by feeling guilty about feeling a little bit joyful. What we're doing is we're allowing ourselves to think about them in a cleaner way, to process them one by one, and to align them to that potential cause in the situation that might be leading us to feel that way. We're sifting the colors of the paint back out of that can so we can say blue. What do I do with blue? What do I do with orange? What do I do with green? What do I do with the red? It's a lot easier to process those emotions once they've been cleaned up.
So quick recap in terms of strategies. We want to get clear on what's inside and outside of your circle of control. Focus your actions on starving the bad wolf, feeding the good one. So essentially doing things that are going to be helpful for thriving and being resilient. We want to sift our emotions. At the end of the day, VUCA situations are going to be here. And there's nothing that we can do necessarily to prevent them or avoid them altogether. We can't even really change the way our mind's default reaction is wired. What we can do, however, is dilute the natural effects through psychological strength, through resilience, by doing those things that we've talked about, by focusing on what you can and can't control, putting action in the direction that you want to move, starving the bad wolf, feeding the good one, and understanding your emotional response and the response of other people.
If you want more free content, if you want to dive deeper into so many topics, we've got, oh gosh, over 350 free episodes of the Building Psych Strength podcast. You can get to it anywhere where you like to receive podcasts. We would love to have you subscribe, learn, and keep diving into these topics that relate so much to us, both personally and professionally. And also, if there is ever a way that we can support your organization, please reach out to us at peakmindpsychology.com. You know, we do a lot of these digital workshops and trainings. We've created curriculum for some of the biggest companies in the US for, you know, their learning management systems, organizational effectiveness and development. We find that this psychological component in teaching people how to be psychologically strong is such a cornerstone to leadership and our development as professionals.
Well, thank you both so much. We really appreciate it. It was a very informative presentation. I don't know if we really have time for the Q&A at this point, but we'd like to thank our Lundbeck and Takeda for their generous support for making Right Direction possible. And just one more plug for Right Direction. You can take a step at the right direction. Here's the website, rightdirectionforme.com. We have a Twitter and LinkedIn. Please subscribe. It is a partnership between Employers Health and the American Psychiatric Association. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation as much as I did.